Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the one destined to protect your soul. She carried his legacy, in secret fleeing into the unforgiving medieval wilds after a brutal public rejection shattered her world. He chose a politically advantageous alliance over his fated mate, completely unaware of the innocent life growing inside her. Years later, watching his dark empire crumble, this ruthless alpha will find himself crawling through the mud, desperate to reclaim the family he threw away. Welcome to a tale of heartbreak survival and ultimate vengeance. Heavy snow fell upon the stone battlements of Ironwood Keep, blanketing the ancient medieval fortress in a thick layer of frost. Inside the grand hall, hearth fires roared, casting flickering long shadows across the tapestries that depicted the legendary werewolf ancestors of the Reed bloodline. It was the night of the winter solstice, a sacred time for the pack meant to celebrate unity survival and the enduring strength of the wolves. Yet for Riley Smith, the warmth of the roaring fires could not penetrate the icy dread settling deep within her bones. Riley stood near the periphery of the great hall, her plain woolen dress a stark contrast to the velvet and silk gowns worn by the high-ranking nobility of the pack. She was a healer's daughter, an orphan of low standing, but the goddess had woven her fate with the highest power in the land. She was the true fated mate of Alpha Gabriel Reed. Gabriel sat at the head of the long oak table, a magnificent figure of lethal grace and terrifying authority. His broad shoulders were draped in heavy dire wool furs, and his piercing storm-grey eyes surveyed his people with the cold calculation of a seasoned warlord. Riley's heart fluttered a traitorous instinctual reaction to the man her wolf recognized as their other half. Her hand instinctively drifted to her lower abdomen, resting gently over the slight, unnoticeable swell there. A secret she had discovered only 3 days prior. She was carrying his child, a true heir to the Ironwood pack. She had planned to tell him tonight. She had envisioned him pulling her into his arms, the stoic mask melting away to reveal the protective, loving mate she knew must exist beneath his ruthless exterior. But as the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the hall shifted into something heavy and suffocating. The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall swung open with a resounding crash. A procession entered, led by Lord Reginald Croft of the neighbouring Silverpine pack. Beside him walked his daughter, Isolde Croft. Isolde was a vision of aristocratic perfection, draped in crimson velvet that accentuated her pale skin and raven-black hair. She walked with the arrogance of a queen, her amber eyes locking directly onto Gabriel. Riley's chest tightened. The air grew thick with the scent of pine musk and a sudden, sharp underlying metallic tang of political maneuvering. Gabriel stood up, his massive frame commanding absolute silence. He did not look at Riley. He had barely looked at her since the night they realized they were mates a month ago, a night of primal passion that he had treated as a shameful secret ever since. People of Ironwood. Gabriel's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling. For years our lands have been threatened by rogue incursions and harsh winters. Strength is not merely born of blood, it is forged in alliances. Tonight I secure the future of our pack. Riley took a step forward, a sudden panic gripping her throat. Her wolf whined, scratching desperately at the confines of her mind. No, he wouldn't. Lord Croft and I have reached an agreement, Gabriel continued, stepping down from the dais and approaching Isolde. He took her delicate, jewel-adorned hand in his. Isolde Croft will be my Luna. We will merge our packs, and together we shall rule the largest territory in the northern realms. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Whispers erupted among the pack members. Many knew of the whispers regarding Riley, though Gabriel had never formally claimed her. Riley's legs trembled. She pushed past a group of startled courtiers, her vision blurring with unshed tears. "Gabriel!" She cried out, her voice breaking the rising murmur. The hall fell dead silent. The Alpha turned his storm-grey eyes toward her, and the absolute void of emotion in his gaze made Riley's blood run cold. There was no love there, no hesitation, only a ruthless determination to solidify his power. Isolde sneered, leaning closer to Gabriel. "Is this the peasant girl you mentioned, my Alpha? The one who thought a mere trick of fate could elevate her above her station?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. He stepped away from Isolde and closed the distance between himself and Riley. He loomed over her, radiating a dominant, suffocating aura that forced weaker wolves to their knees. Riley stood firm, though her soul was fracturing. "Gabriel, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We are mates. The goddess chose us. And I have something to tell you. Something important." "Enough, Riley," Gabriel said, his voice, a low, dangerous rumble, meant only for her ears, yet loud enough to carry in the silent hall. "Fate is a crutch for the weak. I am an Alpha. I forge my own destiny. A pack cannot survive on fated sentiments. It needs wealth armies and unyielding power. Things you, a simple healer, can never provide. I can provide you with love," she pleaded, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "I can provide you with an heir. Please, Gabriel, listen to me. An heir." Isolde laughed mockingly from the dais. "A mongrel pup born of dirt and weeds. Ironwood deserves royal blood." Gabriel did not correct her. Instead, he straightened his posture, his expression hardening into granite. He tapped into the ancient, brutal magic of the mate bond. Riley felt a sudden searing heat in her chest, right where her heart beat for him. "I, Gabriel Reed, Alpha of the Ironwood Pack," he declared, his voice magically amplified, booming like thunder. "Reject you, Riley Smith, as my fated mate and Luna." The words struck her with physical force. Riley collapsed to the cold stone floor as an agonizing, tearing sensation ripped through her soul. It was as if a spectral blade had cleaved her chest open, severing the ethereal silver thread that connected her spirit to his. She screamed a raw, primal sound of pure agony that made several pack members flinch and look away in shame. Her wolf howled in mourning, curling into a dying ball within her mind. Gabriel stood over her, his fists clenched at his sides, a brief, imperceptible flash of pain crossing his features before it was buried beneath his ruthless ambition. "You are stripped of your rank and banished from the High Keep. You will leave these lands by sunrise." He turned his back on her, offering his arm to Isolde. "Let the feast continue." Riley lay on the floor, gasping for breath, the physical pain rivaling the emotional devastation. No one came to her aid. The pack submitted to their Alpha's will. Gathering the last remnants of her shattered dignity, Riley dragged herself up. She clutched her stomach protectively. Her mate had rejected her, but he had also rejected his unborn child without even knowing it. She didn't return to her small quarters. She knew Isolde's guards would likely come to ensure she didn't take anything of value. Riley slipped out through the kitchens, wrapping a thick, stolen wool cloak around her shoulders. The biting winter wind hit her immediately, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice in her heart. Looking back at the towering spires of Ironwood Keep, one last time she made a silent vow to the goddess. She would survive. Her child would survive. And Gabriel Reed would never ever know the magnificent gift he had thrown away. With snow crunching under her boots, Riley Smith disappeared into the treacherous medieval wilderness, a pregnant, rejected outcast walking into the unknown. Biting winds howled through the dense skeletal trees of the whispering woods, whipping snow into Riley's face like tiny shards of glass. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the night of her rejection. 3 weeks of grueling, relentless survival. The severing of a mate bond was a death sentence for many wolves. The grief alone caused them to waste away. But Riley had an anchor, keeping her tethered to the mortal realm, the life growing inside her. Her boots were worn, wrapped in layers of animal hide she had scavenged. She survived on frozen berries, the occasional caught rabbit, and melting snow for water. Her body was weakening. Being in her human form was necessary to preserve the warmth for the baby, but without shifting, her wolf could not heal her frost-bitten fingers or her aching joints. She stumbled over a hidden root, crashing hard into a snowbank. She cried out immediately, curling into a protective ball around her stomach. "I'm sorry, little one," she whimpered, her breath pluming in the freezing air. "I'm so sorry." A low growl echoed through the trees. Riley froze. The scent of rotting meat and stale blood reached her nose. Rogues. Without the protection of a pack, rogues were feral, driven mad by isolation and the harshness of the wild. 2 massive, emaciated wolves stepped out from the shadows of the pines. Their eyes were manic, fixed on her. To them, she was easy prey. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Riley scrambled to her feet, drawing a small iron dagger she had taken from the keep's kitchen. It was a pathetic weapon against fully grown werewolf rogues, but she refused to die on her knees. The first rogue lunged. Riley sidestepped, slashing wildly the blade, catching the beast's shoulder. It yelped, but recovered quickly, snapping its yellowed teeth. The second rogue circled behind her, cutting off her escape. Just as the beasts prepared to strike together, a deafening roar shattered the silence of the woods. A massive timber wolf, its fur the color of rich mahogany, leaped from a snow-covered ridge. It slammed into the first rogue, crushing its windpipe in a single brutal bite. The second rogue whimpered and turned to flee, but 2 more wolves, one silver, one brown, burst from the underbrush, pinning it to the ground and ending its miserable life swiftly. Riley dropped her dagger, her knees finally giving out. The mahogany wolf shifted, standing up as a tall, imposing older man with a thick beard and kind, crinkling eyes around his weathered face. He quickly wrapped a heavy fur around his waist and approached her, his hands raised peacefully. "Peace, child," the man said, his voice a deep, soothing baritone. "I am Cedric Farnsworth, Alpha of the Oakhaven Pack. You are far from any safe borders." I have no borders." Riley managed to choke out before the exhaustion, the cold and the lingering trauma of the severed bond finally overwhelmed her. The world went black. When Riley awoke, she was surrounded by a gentle, radiating warmth. She blinked her eyes open to find herself lying on a thick feather bed inside a sturdy wooden cabin. The smell of burning oak and simmering venison stew filled the air. Cedric Farnsworth sat near the hearth, carving a piece of wood. When he saw her stir, he smiled gently. "Welcome back to the land of the living little wolf." Over the next few months, Oakhaven became her sanctuary. It was a small, hidden pack nestled deep in a fertile valley, surrounded by impassable mountains. Unlike the militaristic cutthroat society of Ironwood Oakhaven, valued peace agriculture and community. Cedric, having lost his own daughter to a sickness years prior, took Riley under his wing, treating her as his own blood. As her belly swelled, the truth of her past came out. Cedric listened in solemn silence as she recounted the betrayal of Gabriel Reed. When she finished, Cedric merely placed a rough, warm hand on her shoulder. "A man who throws away a diamond because he is blinded by the glitter of cheap glass will eventually find his hands empty," he said softly, You are safe here, Riley. Your child will be raised with love, not ambition. The birth was a harrowing ordeal that tested the very limits of Riley's endurance. It happened during a violent summer thunderstorm, the skies mirroring the tempestuous power of the bloodline she carried. For 2 days, she labored the sheer size and spiritual density of the alpha blood within the child, making the process agonizing. When the cries finally pierced the air, overpowering the thunder outside, the entire pack felt a strange, magnetic ripple in the atmosphere. The midwife placed the squirming bundle onto Riley's sweat-drenched chest. Riley looked down, sobbing with absolute joy and a fierce, untamed protective instinct. The baby boy had a shock of dark hair, but when he opened his eyes, Riley's breath hitched. They were storm grey, piercing, intelligent, and holding a depth of ancient power that was undeniable. "Aaron," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Your name is Aaron." Years passed, flowing like the tranquil river that bordered Oakhaven. Riley transformed. The meek, heartbroken healer's daughter died in the snow 5 years ago. In her place stood a formidable woman. She trained with the pack warriors, learning to wield a sword and a bow, determined to never be helpless again. She became the lead healer, a respected figure in the community, and Cedric's most trusted advisor. Aaron grew at an astonishing rate. By his 5th birthday, he was the size of a 7-year-old. He was frighteningly intelligent, fiercely protective of his mother, and naturally commanded the other children in the pack. Even adult wolves subconsciously bared their necks when the boy threw a tantrum. His wolf spirit was so dense, so powerful, that Cedric often worried about how long they could keep his existence hidden. The blood of the Ironwood Alphas was dominant, demanding to be recognized. Riley watched her son practice with wooden swords in the courtyard, his stormy eyes narrowed in fierce concentration, executing moves that no one had taught him. He was the spitting image of his father. A phantom pain echoed in her chest, where her mate bond used to be, but she pushed it down, replacing it with cold, hard resolve. Gabriel had made his choice. Aaron was hers. The grand hall of Ironwood Keep was silent, save for the crackle of the hearth and the nervous shifting of the pack elders. 5 years had passed since the night Gabriel Reed secured his absolute power. Yet the air in the room was thick with despair, not triumph. Gabriel sat upon his carved wooden throne, resting his chin on his fist. He looked 10 years older. The once vibrant storm grey of his eyes was clouded with a permanent, exhausting exhaustion. The wealth and military might he had gained from marrying Isolde Croft had come at a catastrophic cost to the soul of his territory. Isolde sat beside him, sipping from a silver goblet, her face a mask of bitter resentment. Their mating was a political transaction, devoid of the goddess's blessing. Without a true mate bond, their wolves constantly rejected one another. Their coupling was a sterile mechanical duty, and despite 5 years of trying, Isolde's womb remained barren. The whispers in the keep were poisonous. A pack without an heir is a dying pack. Worse still, a strange blight had fallen over the Ironwood lands. The crops withered before harvest. The game migrated away from their forests, and the winters seemed to stretch longer each year. The pack members were growing sick, their spirits broken. Without the harmonizing magic of a true Luna to anchor the pack's energy, the Alpha's oppressive dominance was slowly crushing his own people. Alpha, spoke Elder Thorn, a wizened man with a scarred face. The northern storehouses are nearly empty. If we do not secure food before the next freeze, half the lower village will starve. Gabriel pinched the bridge of his nose, a migraine pulsing at his temples. What of the trade routes with the Riverlands? They refuse our silver, sire, Thorn replied carefully. They say Ironwood silver carries bad luck. They demand grain which we do not have." Isolde scoffed, setting her goblet down with a sharp clack. "Let the soldiers take what we need. We have the largest army in the region. Let them earn their keep." Gabriel turned his head, slowly glaring at his wife. "We cannot conquer starvation by burning the fields of our neighbors, Isolde. That is the mentality of a rogue, not a ruler." Isolde's eyes flashed with anger. "Do not speak to me of ruling, Gabriel. If you had the strength to properly lead, your people wouldn't be questioning my fertility behind my back. Perhaps if your soul wasn't as barren as your heart, the goddess would bless us." Gabriel snapped his patience, finally snapping. The hall gasped. Isolde turned pale, then stood up furious, and stormed out of the hall, her guards trailing behind her. Gabriel rubbed his face, feeling the hollow, aching void in his chest. For 5 years, not a day went by that he did not see Riley's tear-stained face in his dreams. He had convinced himself he was making the hard, necessary choice for his people. But as he watched his empire crumble from the inside out, the terrifying realization clawed at him. He had defied fate, and fate was exacting its revenge. "There is another option, Alpha," Elder Thorne said, softly, breaking the tense silence. "Rumors have reached us from the southern merchants. There is a hidden valley beyond the Whispering Woods. The Oakhaven Pack." Gabriel frowned. "Oakhaven. A pacifist farming pack. They are weak. They are thriving, sire," Thorne corrected. "Their harvests overflow. Their people are healthy. Their Alpha Cedric Farnsworth is old, but they have a new lead healer who has supposedly cured ailments we consider fatal. They have grain to spare." Gabriel stood up, his heavy fur cloak shifting around his broad shoulders. Desperation makes men swallow their pride. "Prepare my horse and a small escort. I will ride to Oakhaven and negotiate a trade treaty myself." The journey took 4 days through treacherous mountainous terrain. When Gabriel and his 5 heavily armed guards finally crested the ridge and looked down into the Oakhaven Valley, he was stunned. Amidst the failing lands of the north, this valley was a vibrant paradise of green fields, sturdy wooden architecture, and laughing children. They rode down to the settlement gates. The Oakhaven guards, though less armored than Gabriel's men, stood their ground with a calm, unyielding discipline. Word was sent to Alpha Cedric, and Gabriel was escorted into the bustling central courtyard. Gabriel dismounted, pulling off his riding gloves. The atmosphere here was light joyous. It grated against his foul mood. As he waited near the central fountain, his sharp werewolf hearing picked up the sound of wooden swords clashing nearby. He turned his head. On a training platform, a young boy no older than 5 was sparring with a teenager twice his size. The boy was relentless, a whirlwind of calculated aggression and raw instinct. With a swift sweep of his leg and a surprisingly powerful thrust of his wooden blade, the boy disarmed the teenager, sending the older boy tumbling to the dirt. Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. He took a step forward, completely ignoring his guards. The boy stood victorious, wiping sweat from his brow. He had dark hair, a strong jawline that looked terrifyingly familiar, and when the boy turned his head to look at the newcomers, Gabriel felt the earth drop out from beneath his boots. Storm-grey eyes. His eyes. The boy stared back at Gabriel, completely unintimidated by the massive, scarred Alpha. In fact, the boy's aura flared a distinctly dominant, challenging Alpha aura that resonated with Gabriel's very blood. "Who are you?" the boy demanded, his voice carrying an authority that shouldn't belong to a child. Gabriel couldn't speak. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. He took another trembling step towards the boy. What is your name, child?" Before the boy could answer, a voice rang out across the courtyard. A voice that had haunted Gabriel's nightmares and echoed in his empty soul for 5 agonizing years. "Aaron, step away from them." Gabriel froze. The blood drained from his face. He turned slowly as if moving underwater. Standing on the steps of the healing pavilion was Riley, but she was not the frail, meek girl he had broken in his great hall. She was dressed in fitted leather armor, a real steel sword strapped to her hip. Her hair was braided back like a warrior's, and her posture was straight regal and fiercely protective. She looked like a true Luna. Her eyes met his. There was no fear, no love, only an icy, unyielding calm that shattered whatever remained of Gabriel's pride. The scent hit him then. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the boy to him. Oak rain and his own scent. Reed blood. The scent of a true-born alpha heir. Gabriel fell to his knees in the dirt. His guards gasped in shock, reaching for their weapons, but Gabriel threw a hand up, silencing them. He stared up at the woman he had thrown away, the realization of his monumental, unforgivable mistake crashing down upon him with the weight of a collapsing mountain. He had rejected his fated mate while she carried his son. "Riley." Gabriel choked out his voice, cracking the ruthless alpha, suddenly sounding like a broken begging man. Riley walked down the steps, placing a protective hand on Aaron's shoulder. She looked down at the man kneeling in the mud before her. "Alpha Gabriel," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You are trespassing on my home. State your business or crawl back to your dying kingdom." The cold mud seeped through the fine woolen trousers of Gabriel Reed, but the Alpha of Ironwood Keep didn't care. For the first time in his life, the pride that had built his empire evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, agonizing void of regret. He knelt in the dirt of the Oakhaven courtyard, staring up at the woman he had banished to the winter wilderness 5 years ago. "Mother." Aaron's voice was sharp, laced with a protective edge that mirrored Gabriel's own defensive instincts. The young boy stepped in front of Riley, raising his wooden practice sword toward the massive kneeling alpha. "Why is this man crying in the dirt? Shall I have the guards remove him?" The innocence in the boy's ruthless assessment felt like a physical blow to Gabriel's chest. The great Alpha Reed, feared across the northern realms, was nothing more than a pathetic trespasser in the eyes of his true-born heir. "Stand down, Aaron," Riley said smoothly, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. She did not look at Gabriel with anger, which terrified him more than any screaming fit would have. She looked at him with absolute, freezing indifference. "This is Alpha Gabriel of Ironwood. He has come seeking our grain, for his own lands are barren. My lands are dying because my soul is empty. Riley." Gabriel rasped his voice, tearing at the syllables. He ignored the gasps of his own personal guard, who were utterly bewildered by their warlord's sudden submission. "I did not know. The goddess is my witness. If I had known you carried my child, I never would have— You never would have what?" Riley cut him off, her voice cracking like a whip across the silent courtyard. "You never would have thrown me out to freeze in the whispering woods. You never would have publicly stripped me of my dignity to marry a woman for her silver. Do not insult my intelligence, Gabriel. You made your choice for power, and now you are choking on it." Gabriel lowered his head, the heavy mantle of dire wolf fur feeling like an iron cage around his neck. "I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I beg you, Riley, let me make amends. Let me know my son." "He is not your son," Riley replied, her tone final. "He is my blood. He is Oakhaven's pride. You severed the mate bond, Gabriel. The ancient laws are clear. When you cast me out and ripped our souls apart, you forfeited any claim to me or my offspring." Before Gabriel could protest, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel. Alpha Cedric Farnsworth strode through the crowd, his silver hair catching the midday sun. Flanking him were a dozen Oakhaven archers, their bows casually held, but arrows knocked a silent warning to Gabriel's armed escort. "Lord Reed," Cedric greeted, his deep voice rumbling with quiet authority. "It is a rare sight to see the Butcher of the North on his knees in my humble village. You sent word you wished to negotiate trade." Gabriel slowly pushed himself up from the mud. His knees ached, but the pain in his chest was suffocating. He looked at Cedric, then back to Riley, who had subtly moved Aaron further behind her. "I came for grain," Gabriel admitted, his voice regaining a fraction of its gravelly timbre. "But I have found something far more precious. I demand." "You demand nothing?" Cedric interrupted, his aura flaring, pushing back against Gabriel's dominant presence. "You are in Oakhaven territory. Riley is my lead healer and my chosen kin. If you speak to her with disrespect or attempt to lay a finger on that boy, the treaty ends before it begins, and you will find out that farmers know how to reap more than just wheat." Gabriel clenched his fists. A younger, brasher version of himself would have drawn steel and taken his mate and child by force. But looking at Riley's steady hand, resting on the pommel of her own sword, he knew force would only end in tragedy. Furthermore, the severed bond meant she had no innate biological compulsion to submit to him. She was truly free. "Please," Gabriel whispered the word, tasting like ash. "Let me speak with her in private. Just for a moment." Cedric glanced at Riley. She held Gabriel's desperate gaze for a long moment before giving a single curt nod. "Take the boy to the training hall, Cedric. I will hear what the Alpha of Ironwood has to say." Gabriel followed Riley into the healing pavilion. The space smelled of dried lavender, crushed mint, and the sharp tang of distilled spirits. The walls were lined with meticulously organized glass vials and thick leather-bound books. Riley moved behind a heavy oak table, crossing her arms. "Your people are starving, and your soldiers are suffering from the wasting sickness," Riley stated, completely bypassing any emotional pleasantries. "I know this because refugees from your southern borders have been trickling into our lands for a year. I have treated them using techniques I developed by studying the private anatomical journals of the legendary physician William Harvey, mapping the corruption in their bloodlines caused by a pack without a true Luna." Gabriel stared at her, mesmerized. The meek girl who used to lower her eyes when he entered the room was gone. In her place was a brilliant, hardened tactician. "The pack suffers because I am suffering, Riley. Isolde and I. The mating is false. The land rejects her. It rejects me. And you thought coming here buying our grain would fix the rot in your foundation. I didn't know you were here," he confessed, taking a step forward. He reached out a trembling hand, but stopped inches from her face, afraid she would strike him. "But now that I have found you, come back with me. Bring Aaron. I will set Isolde aside. I will publicly beg for your forgiveness in front of the entire northern realm. You will be Luna. Aaron will be raised as the crown prince of the largest empire." "Stop!" Riley's eyes flashed with a lethal danger. "Do you hear yourself? You still think in terms of crowns and empires. You think you can purchase my forgiveness with the very same power you sold me out for. I am trying to give you what is rightfully yours," Gabriel pleaded, his voice breaking. "What was rightfully mine was your loyalty," Riley shouted, her composure finally cracking. "When I was alone in the snow, bleeding, fighting off feral rogues with a kitchen knife to protect your unborn child, where was your empire when I suffered through agonizing days of labor because your alpha blood made the birth nearly impossible? Where were you? You were sitting on your wooden throne, wrapped in velvet, with that barren snake by your side. Gabriel flinched as if struck by a physical blow. Tears finally spilled from his storm-grey eyes, tracking through the dirt on his face. Riley, I am so sorry. I deserve your hatred. But the boy, Aaron, he is an alpha. He needs a father to teach him how to harness that power. He has Cedric, Riley replied coldly, turning her back on him to organize a row of herbs, her hands shaking slightly. And he has the manuals of William Marshall to teach him the sword. He does not need a coward who abandons his family for political gain. We will grant your men 2 wagons of grain out of pity for the innocent children in your pack. Then you will leave. If you ever return to Oakhaven, I will kill you myself. For 3 days the wagons were loaded, but Gabriel Reed refused to leave. Instead of returning to the comfort of his guest quarters, the ruthless alpha stripped off his heavy furs and silken tunics. Dressed only in rough linen trousers and a coarse undershirt, Gabriel walked into the Oakhaven wheat fields at dawn. He took up a scythe and joined the lowest-ranking pack members in the harvest. The village watched in stunned silence as the feared warlord swung the heavy blade hour after hour, blistered hands bleeding onto the wooden handle, sweat pouring down his scarred back. He did not speak. He did not demand water. He simply worked until his muscles gave out, punishing himself physically, because the emotional pain was too great to bear. Aaron watched him from the fence line. The boy was highly intelligent, his instincts far sharper than a normal 5-year-old's. He felt a strange magnetic pull toward the large, brooding man in the fields. One afternoon, when the sun was beating down mercilessly, Aaron walked up to the fence and set a wooden bucket of fresh well water on the top rail. Gabriel paused, his chest heaving, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the water, then at the boy. His heart leapt into his throat. "Thank you," Gabriel rasped, stepping toward the fence. Aaron didn't smile. He studied Gabriel's face with unsettling intensity. "My mother says you are a broken king from a dying land. She says you made a terrible mistake." Gabriel swallowed hard, gripping the bucket with trembling, calloused hands. "Your mother is the wisest woman I have ever known, Aaron. I made the worst mistake a man can make. I threw away my heart." "Can you fix it?" the boy asked, tilting his head. "I don't know," Gabriel admitted honestly, the vulnerability feeling strange on his tongue. "But I will spend the rest of my life trying, even if I have to harvest every field in this valley until I die." Aaron considered this, then turned and ran back toward the training yards. It was a tiny interaction, but to Gabriel it felt like a monumental victory. A tiny crack in the ice, but hundreds of miles away in the dark, sprawling corridors of Ironwood. Keep the Ice was rapidly turning into poison. Isolde Croft sat furiously in her private chambers, throwing a silver goblet against the stone wall, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. Standing before her was a cloaked spy, trembling slightly under the Luna's murderous glare. "Repeat it!" Isolde hissed, her amber eyes glowing with a toxic, unnatural light. "Repeat what you just told me." "The Alpha has found his fated mate, my lady." The spy stuttered, keeping his eyes on the floor. "The healer Riley. She resides in the Oakhaven pack, and she bore a child. A boy. He is 5 winters old, bearing the Alpha's exact likeness and scent. The rumors say Lord Reed is on his knees, begging to reclaim them." Isolde's breathing became ragged. Her hands gripped the velvet arms of her chair so hard her manicured nails dug into the wood. A true-born heir. A living, breathing testament to Gabriel's fated bond. For 5 years she had endured the whispers of the pack, the disdainful looks from the elders who blamed her barren womb for the pack's misfortune. If Gabriel returned with his fated mate and a male heir, Isolde would not just be set aside. She would be ruined. The Croft family's political leverage would dissolve overnight. "He will cast me out," Isolde whispered to herself, a manic paranoia gripping her mind. "He will strip me of my titles and give my crown to that peasant whore." She stood up, pacing the room frantically. She could not let Gabriel return with them. She had to sever the rot at the root. "Send for Roderick," Isolde commanded, turning back to the spy with a look of pure, unadulterated malice. The spy paled. "My lady, Roderick of the Crimson Hounds." "They are outlaws, mercenaries with no honor. If the Alpha finds out you have dealt with—" "Do as I command," Isolde shrieked, her fangs descending. "Bring him to me through the servants' tunnels tonight. No one must know." By midnight, the shadow of a massive, heavily scarred man slipped into Isolde's chambers. Roderick was a disgraced former Alpha, his pack destroyed in a territorial war years ago. Now he led a band of 50 ruthless rogue mercenaries who cared nothing for pack law or the goddess's decrees. They killed for silver and slaughtered for pleasure. Isolde tossed a heavy leather pouch onto the table. It clinked with the undeniable sound of pure gold coinage. "There is an isolated village in the southern valley called Oakhaven," Isolde said, coldly, keeping her distance from the foul-smelling mercenary. "It is undefended, populated by weak farmers and pacifists. I want it burned to the ground." Roderick picked up the pouch, weighing it in his massive hand. He sneered, revealing a mouth full of rotting, yellowed teeth. "A lot of gold for a few farmers, my lady. What is the real prize?" "There is a woman," Isolde instructed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "A healer named Riley, and she has a 5-year-old boy. I do not care what you do to the rest of the village, but those two must die. Bring me their heads, and I will triple this amount." Roderick's eyes gleamed with cruel delight. "Consider them already dead, Luna." As Roderick slipped back into the night, Isolde poured herself another goblet of wine, a wicked smile playing on her lips. Gabriel might be a fool, blinded by a fated bond, but she was a survivor. Let him stay in Oakhaven a few days longer. He would have a front-row seat to watch his precious second chance burn to ashes. Meanwhile, back in Oakhaven, the sun was setting on Gabriel's 4th day of labor. He sat by the river, washing the dirt and blood from his hands, staring blankly at the rushing water. He knew he was running out of time. His pack needed him, yet leaving Riley and Aaron felt like tearing out his own heart a second time. A sudden sharp rustle in the underbrush across the river caught his attention. Gabriel's head snapped up. His wolf instincts, dormant and subdued during his days of peasant labor, suddenly flared to life with terrifying intensity. The wind shifted, blowing down from the northern mountain pass. Gabriel inhaled sharply. The scent was faint but unmistakable. Unwashed fur, stale blood, the metallic tang of unsheathed weapons, rogues, and not just one or two feral wanderers. It was the scent of an organized, approaching army. Gabriel's storm-gray eyes widened in horror as the realization hit him. The northern pass was supposed to be a secret. Someone had sold them out. He scrambled to his feet, a deafening, chest-rattling roar erupting from his throat, a true Alpha's warning call that echoed across the entire valley, shattering the peaceful twilight of Oakhaven. War had come to their sanctuary, and Gabriel knew immediately that this was no random raid. They had come for his family. Chaos erupted across the valley in a terrifying instant. Gabriel's primal warning roar echoed off the jagged mountain ridges, a booming decree that sent a jolt of pure adrenaline into every soul residing within Oakhaven. The peaceful twilight shattered as the tree line along the northern ridge seemed to vomit forth a tide of snarling, malformed beasts. Roderick and his crimson hounds poured down the hillside, their eyes wild with feral hunger and the promise of golden coin. The pacifist farmers of Oakhaven, long thought to be weak, quickly revealed a hidden, desperate resilience. Warning bells tolled from the central watchtower. Men and women dropped their harvesting scythes and picked up spears, iron-tipped pitchforks, and sturdy hunting bows. Alpha Cedric Farnsworth, despite his advancing age, transformed into his magnificent mahogany wolf, leading his small but disciplined vanguard to form a defensive perimeter around the village square. But Gabriel did not wait for the enemy to reach the gates. Stripped to his waist, his muscles gleaming with the sweat of honest labor, he sprinted directly toward the incoming horde. Mid-stride, he embraced the shift. His bones cracked and elongated, his human skin giving way to a dense, impenetrable coat of dark fur. He became a dire wolf of legendary proportions, a beast of shadow and raw muscle that dwarfed even the largest of the rogue mercenaries. He crashed into their front lines like a falling meteor. The impact sent 3 rogues flying through the air. Gabriel was a whirlwind of lethal precision, fighting not for territory or political dominance, but for the very existence of his fated mate and his true-born heir. He crushed limbs, snapped weapons, and tossed massive wolves aside as if they were mere pups. Yet Roderick was a cunning, dishonorable fighter. Recognizing that the giant direwolf was tearing his forces apart, Roderick signaled his most elite assassins. Instead of engaging Gabriel, a splinter group of heavily armed rogues flanked the village, slipping through the southern orchards and making a direct line for the healing pavilion. Riley stood on the steps of the pavilion, pushing Aaron behind her into the safety of the reinforced doorway. She drew her steel longsword, her expression morphing into a mask of cold, maternal fury. She was no longer the fragile girl of Ironwood Keep. She had spent years studying the martial arts, specifically adapting the defensive parries and swift counterstrikes found in the private combat manuscripts of the legendary master Fiore dei Liberi. As the first rogue lunged at her with a rusted battle-axe, Riley sidestepped with liquid grace. She deflected the heavy blow, allowing the rogue's momentum to carry him forward, and delivered a swift, devastating strike to his exposed flank. The beast howled and crumpled to the dirt. "Stay inside, Aaron," Riley commanded, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "Mother, look out!" the young boy screamed, pointing toward the shadows. Roderick himself emerged from the gloom, his massive human form heavily scarred and terrifying to behold. He wielded a serrated sword coated in a toxic silver-based paste designed to prevent a werewolf from healing. He sneered, looking at Riley and the boy peering from the doorway. "The Luna of Ironwood sends her deepest regards," Roderick snarled, confirming the treasonous plot. "She pays handsomely for the heads of peasant whores and bastard pups." Riley's eyes widened, the horrific truth of Isolde's jealousy washing over her. But she had no time to process it. Roderick charged, his strength overwhelming. He swung his heavy silvered blade, forcing Riley to block. The impact sent a shockwave up her arms, dropping her to one knee. Her sword clattered across the cobblestones out of reach. Roderick laughed, raising his weapon high for a lethal downward strike, aimed directly at the doorway where Aaron stood, frozen in terror. A deafening, earth-shattering roar tore through the pavilion courtyard. Gabriel, having seen the flank attack from across the battlefield, had abandoned his defensive position. He crossed the distance in a blur of sheer, unadulterated desperation, knowing his massive dire wolf form would be too wide to intercept the specific angle of the blade without crushing Aaron in the process. Gabriel shifted back to his human form, mid-leap. He threw himself over Riley and his son, turning his back to the descending mercenary. The sickening sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone silenced the immediate area. Roderick's silver-coated blade plunged deep into Gabriel's back, erupting through the front of his chest and missing his heart by mere inches. Gabriel gasped, his storm-grey eyes locking onto Aaron's terrified face. A scarlet stain rapidly spread across his linen shirt, the vital fluid soaking into the wooden floorboards. He did not scream. He only looked at his son, offering a strained, tragic smile of pure devotion before his immense weight collapsed to the floor. "No!" Riley screamed, a sound of absolute soul-shattering anguish. Roderick violently yanked his blade free, preparing to finish the job, but he had miscalculated the fury of a mother. Fueled by grief and an adrenaline surge that defied mortal limits, Riley snatched a heavy iron pestle from her nearby apothecary table. With a feral cry, she smashed it directly into Roderick's temple. The mercenary captain stumbled, his eyes rolling back, and Riley seized his own dropped dagger, burying it into his throat. Seeing their warlord fall, the remaining Crimson Hounds broke rank and fled into the night, chased down by Cedric's archers. The battle was won, but the cost was devastating. The healing pavilion smelled of burning sage, strong distilled spirits, and the coppery tang of impending death. Gabriel lay unmoving on the central operating table, his breathing shallow and erratic. The silver poison from Roderick's blade was actively burning through his cellular structure, fighting his natural werewolf healing abilities. Riley worked with frantic, terrifying efficiency. She barked orders to her apprentices, demanding clean linens, boiling water, and specialized clamps. She abandoned traditional werewolf remedies, instead relying on advanced anatomical knowledge she had studied from the restricted private medical texts of the brilliant Renaissance surgeon Ambroise Paré. Using his revolutionary techniques, she carefully extracted the silver shards and ligated the severed arteries with silk threads, refusing to use the barbaric method of cauterization that would only cause Gabriel further shock. Aaron stood in the corner of the room, his small hands trembling as he clutched a wooden practice sword. Tears streamed down his face. The man who had abandoned him had just sacrificed his own life to save him. The complexity of that truth warred within the young boy's brilliant mind. "Hold his shoulders down," Riley instructed two burly Oakhaven guards. "The final silver extraction will burn." She pulled the last jagged piece of the toxic metal from Gabriel's chest cavity. Gabriel's body arched off the table with a choked, agonizing gasp, his eyes flying open, completely blind with pain, before he fell back, entirely limp. The monitors of his spiritual energy, observable to a trained healer, began to dim. The silver had done too much damage to his heart. "No." Riley whispered, her hands covered in his crimson life essence. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to channel her own life force into him. "No, Gabriel. You don't get to do this. You don't get to die a hero and leave us again. Come back." Tears spilled from her eyes, splashing directly onto the angry, gaping wound over his heart, the exact physical location where their mate bond used to anchor. Ancient werewolf lore spoke of fated bonds as ethereal threads woven by the goddess herself. An alpha could verbally reject a mate, and the resulting trauma could sever the conscious connection, causing agonizing pain. But a true bond forged by destiny could never be entirely erased. It simply went dormant, waiting for a catalyst of absolute unconditional sacrifice to reignite the spark. As Riley's tears mixed with Gabriel's vital fluids, a sudden blinding warmth filled the room. The air hummed with a resonant frequency that made the glass vials on the shelves rattle. A soft golden luminescence began to radiate from Gabriel's chest. The severed spiritual thread, recognizing the ultimate proof of love, a willingness to lay down one's life, snapped back into place with a fierce, binding energy. Riley gasped, staggering backward, as the overwhelming rush of Gabriel's soul crashed back into her own mind. She felt his profound regret, his endless sorrow, and his unwavering, desperate love for her and Aaron. The mate bond was restored stronger and more resilient than before, and the golden energy accelerated his healing, pushing the last remnants of the poison from his veins. Gabriel's chest rose with a deep, clear breath. The crisis had passed. It took 3 full weeks for Gabriel to regain his strength. During that time, he did not speak of Ironwood Keep or his title. He spent his days sitting in the courtyard, watching Aaron practice with the village guards, occasionally offering quiet, gentle advice on footwork and balance. Aaron, initially hesitant, slowly gravitated toward his father, the innate alpha connection drawing them together. On the 1-month anniversary of the battle, a horn sounded from the northern ridge. Gabriel and Riley stood together on the pavilion steps as a procession of armored wolves rode into the valley. It was not an army, but a heavily guarded caravan. Leading them was Elder Thorn of Ironwood. Behind Thorn's horse was a reinforced iron cage carriage. Inside, stripped of her velvet gowns and royal jewels, sat Isolde Croft. She looked haggard, her amber eyes darting around with frantic paranoia. Elder Thorn dismounted and bowed deeply before Gabriel, but his eyes respectfully shifted to Riley, dipping his head in reverence to the true Luna. Alpha Gabriel. Thorn announced his voice, carrying across the quiet courtyard. Following your departure, a spy was caught, attempting to send further payments to the Crimson Hounds. Under interrogation, he confessed to everything. The Luna, the false Luna, orchestrated the assassination attempt on your fated mate and true-born heir. A murmur of disgust rippled through the Oakhaven villagers who had gathered to watch. The Croft family attempted to shield her, but the pack demanded justice. Thorn continued. The land is rejecting her presence entirely. The crops have turned to ash. We have brought her to you for only the Alpha can pass final judgment on treason of this magnitude. We beg you, sire, return to us. Bring your Luna and your heir. Ironwood cannot survive without its true heart. Gabriel stared at the cage. Isolde gripped the iron bars, her face twisted in a desperate sneer. You cannot do this, Gabriel. My father will raise an army. You need my family's wealth. Gabriel's storm-grey eyes were devoid of anger. He only felt profound pity for the woman. He stepped forward, intertwining his fingers with Riley's. The public display of affection, anchored by the radiant warmth of their restored mate bond, caused Isolde to flinch violently. Your wealth brought us nothing but starvation and rot, Isolde. Gabriel said, his voice calm and authoritative. You sought to murder an innocent child to protect a crown you never earned. I strip you of the name Reed. I strip you of your rank. You are banished to the Whispering Woods, just as you once celebrated the banishment of a far better woman. If you survive the winter, you will live as a rogue. Isolde screamed curses as the guards dragged her cage away, her reign of bitter jealousy finally brought to an end. Gabriel turned to Elder Thorn. He looked at the loyal elder, then out across the vibrant, thriving fields of Oakhaven, and finally down at Riley and Aaron. I will return to Ironwood, Elder Thorn. Gabriel stated, his voice resonating with a new grounded wisdom. But I do not return as the supreme ruler you once knew. I return as a father, a mate, and an ally. Ironwood and Oakhaven shall be united not by conquest, but by mutual respect and shared prosperity. Riley is your Luna. Aaron is your future Alpha, and any who question this will answer to me. Thorn smiled, genuine relief washing over his scarred face. We welcome our Luna. We welcome our prince. That evening, As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of violet and gold, Gabriel sat near the edge of the river. He tossed small pebbles into the water, lost in thought. He felt a small presence beside him. Aaron sat down on the grass, picking up a pebble of his own. He threw it, watching it skip twice across the surface. "Will we have to live in a stone castle now?" Aaron asked, his tone skeptical. Gabriel chuckled softly, a sound that felt entirely foreign, but wonderfully right. "Only during the harsh winters, my son. In the spring and summer, we will return here. You must learn to harvest wheat before you learn to rule men. A king who does not know how to feed his people is no king at all." Riley approached quietly from behind, wrapping a warm wool blanket over Gabriel's broad shoulders. She leaned down, resting her chin on his head, breathing in the scent of rain oak and the enduring strength of the man who had finally found his way home. They had lost years to arrogance and deceit, but the goddess had granted them a second dawn. The ruthless alpha had been broken, only to be rebuilt into a protector, worthy of the family he had once cast aside. As Aaron laughed, successfully skipping a stone 3 times, Gabriel closed his eyes, knowing that true wealth was not found in silver or crowns, but in the unbroken bond of a family united. Thank you so much for journeying through this epic tale of betrayal, sacrifice, and ultimate redemption. If Riley's fierce resilience and Gabriel's dramatic fight for a second chance kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to share this story with fellow fantasy romance lovers who crave a good alpha grovel, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, original werewolf storytelling. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite twist in the story,